Hey friends, welcome back. What time is it where you are, and where in the world are you listening from tonight? If you can, dim the lights, lie back, maybe let a small fan hum. Breathe slowly. It's cold in the stone room, a thin draft threading under the door, and somewhere a guard's step echoes like a metronome for the past. Story 1. Nero and the Quiet Machinery of Misrule. Tonight the lamps burn low over a room that smells of damp mortar and ash. You wake beneath a rough wool cloak in an insular stairwell, listening to the city's ordinary music. The tread of the night watch, a mule bell, the soft clack of amphora stoppers. Nero is emperor, a young man with soft hands and a theater voice, and his power fills the streets like the slow flow of olive oil. You rise and walk, keeping to the shadowed edge where brick meets roadway, where new fire breaks widen alleys that once trapped heat and smoke. It is the Rome after the Great Fire. Regulations, copied in clay and wax, now require walls of brick-faced concrete, porticos to shield pedestrians, and courtyards open to the sky. Builders must leave space between structures. Inspectors count doorways. Water sellers measure out ladles beside cisterns fed by the aqueduct's patient gradient. This is governance in sandals, measurements, chalk lines, fines. The vigils patrol with hooks and buckets, more clerk than soldier until the alarm sounds, then suddenly all urgency and ash. You pass a granary where the annona is tallied. Grain from Egypt and Africa arrives through the harbors at Ostia and Portus, dredged and improved since Claudius. Officials test for damp, weigh for shrinkage, and slice away fraud with a careful knife. Somewhere, accounts are written in best Latin, rows of numbers deciding whether bread will be coarse or fine, whether the price will creep up on the Subura's corner tomorrow. Nero's portrait sits on the coin that changes hands. The silver runs a little thinner than before, still bright in a calloused palm. At the Esquiline, laborers pick at the earth of a palace that will be called golden. They smooth stucco, pour concrete, and sketch colonnades that catch borrowed daylight from sheets of water. Your sandals gather the dust of imperial taste, the practical tangle of moving spoil heaps and securing marble without blocking a baker's doorway. A steward notes deliveries. A foreman curses lime that cures too slowly in the humid heat. A mason tests the mix by thumb and habit rather than statute, trusting the wall will hold. Rumor is another department. Nero sings on stage and wagging tongues say a prince should not. Yet the theaters fill, permits for performances are signed and sealed. Vendors learn the small economies of crowds. Watered wine at one price before the chorus, another after. The city adapts. The empire's arteries carry tax to Rome and law outward. In tabularies, clerks press reeds into wax and list the names of men who owe and men who must be paid. Lines marching like soldiers across a page that never ends. A stray dog noses your hand. The night watch raps a door twice and moves on. Over everything lies the soft, careful pressure of rules, some sensible, some self-serving, none spectacular. If a city can be kept by regulations and a ruler by applause, what gathers, grain by grain, in the shadowed corners where ledgers do not reach, and how long before someone notices the weight? Morning comes like thin milk poured over brick, and the city begins its careful chores. You pass the Praetorian barracks where pay chests are tallied, brass coins tipped into creaking scales and checked against tablets. A promised donative after a festival keeps tempers even. Loyalty, like lime, sets better when moistened with silver. The prefect Tigellinus moves quietly, cultivating informers and trimming rumors before they bloom. A senator's door opens, then closes. Inside, wax receives names and neat sums, and the hall smells of oil and wool. You cross to the secretariat, where letters leave by the cursus publicus. Couriers take sealed packets impressed with the emperor's ring, and a relay schedule that measures distance in hoofbeats. Orders travel faster than carts of stone. In Spain, a procurator weighs mine output and lists shipments of copper and silver. In Asia, a governor surveys a road with staff and shadow, chalking ruts for repair. The empire's nerves twitch because clerks can count. Nero's advisors have changed. Seneca's careful counsel and Burrus's discipline once steadied the room. Now taste and theater drift nearer the center. You join a crowd entering a temporary stage where measures govern pleasure. Rows numbered, exits widened, vendors licensed to sell watered wine by the sextarius. He sings, and regulations hum beneath the music. Captains record tonnage, brokers submit cargo lists, and dock fees are inked line by line in a counting house that never quite sleeps. The coin looks the same, but it is subtly other. Weight shaves down, and the silver flows thinner through the die. Debasement is a quiet policy, and quiet policies bite later. In the streets, you hear the arithmetic of survival. A baker recalculates a loaf. A lamp oil seller waters a measure by one more drop. A mason finds his wage buys less salt, and no complaint changes the numbers written in wax. After the fire, new laws made Rome safer, and that is true. Yet safety is not stability. Confiscations refill a treasury drained by entertainments and palaces. Those who fall from favor learn how swiftly private becomes public. Delators, professional accusers paid in a share, map every hinge and eve of a neighbor's life. Across the Tiber in the gardens, a small new sect is punished as arsonists. Crowds come, uneasy, to watch and whisper. Administration works. Tickets are counted, guards posted, and torches lit on schedule. He tore Greece and wins crowns no one dares deny him. A storm season delays convoys. A shipment spoils. A payout to the troops cannot be postponed. The city endures by doing what cities do: sweeping, stamping, measuring, mending. The ledgers rustle like leaves. Numbers persist. Relentlessly. You listen to the steady clack of styluses and wonder this. When the arithmetic that holds everything together no longer adds up, who will notice first? The guard with a lighter purse, the baker with a heavier loaf, or the emperor beneath a brighter spotlight? By high summer, the ledgers feel heavier than the amphory. You stand in the shadow of the septa while a corn dole is counted out. The clerks read, tapping like a metronome on wood. The rules that once soothed now chafe. New assessments, new seizures, new names added to inventories that began as catalogs and hardened into sentences. After the Pisonian conspiracy, prosecutions become a habit. Estates move on paper before they move by cart. The Domus Aurea drinks money the way porous clay drinks water, steadily, invisibly, until the jar is empty. You hear of Armenia and Parthia in the measured voice of a copyist. Treaties made, commanders replaced, a triumph arranged with care for its order of captives and its route of applause. The empire still functions. It always functions until not. Ships miss their winds. An Alexandrian grain convoy arrives spotted with mold. The prefect calculates losses and writes figures that look neat and sound anxious. A donative promise to the guard lands late. The barracks grow quiet in a way that means listening. In Gallia Lugdunensis, Gaius Julius Vindex rebels. His proclamations travel faster than wagons, repeated in courtyards and taverns with small errors that change nothing essential. You watch a money changer test a denarius on a stone, peering at the faint line of its truth. In Hispania, Galba waits, cautious as a man feeling a stare in the dark. In Rome, Tigellinus chooses new enemies and old friends with equal efficiency. The city's ordinary life, scavenging ashes from a brazier, measuring oil by the ladle continues, but the air develops edges. On a morning edged with dust, notices appear promising reward for loyalty and reprieve for obedience. The Praetorians, practical men, count. Their prefect Nymphidius Sabinus whispers a different arithmetic. Another emperor, another donative, another future. You pass the Milvian bridge where hoofbeats roll like an abacus. The city seems to lean, very slightly, as though the ground has shifted a thumb's breadth beneath the paving. The end does not look like a collapsed wall. It looks like sealed doors, hurried messages, and the careful rasp of a stylus striking through a name. Nero flees to a suburban villa. The records will say he dies by his own hand, with a line about an artist and his end that scribes repeat and readers memorize. In the offices, wax tablets are scraped smooth. The state restores older forms with new faces. The golden house stands unfinished. Its foundations are sound, its purpose now obsolete. You walk the Esquiline again. A mason mixes mortar to the same proportions as last year. A baker still knocks the heel of each loaf to test for a hollow where air pretended to be bread. Most things continue. That is the lesson lodged in the city like a nail left under paint. Governments fail in accounts before they fail in alleys, and lives are adjusted by weights and measures long before they are altered by swords. When numbers lose their honesty, streets keep their shape for a while. And then, without spectacle, they learn a new map that everyone steps into as if it had always been there. Story 2. King John and the Price of Salt and Parchment. You wake to the thud of tally sticks at Westminster, where the exchequer grinds numbers like grain. Clerks in ink stained will chant totals from pipe rolls, parchment membranes stitched end to end. Last year's debts rolled into this year's hopes. A sheriff kneels, produces notched tallies, then breaks sticks so payer and crown hold matching halves. It is spring in King John's England, and governance is craft of wood, wax, and coin. Salt first. Without it there is no winter fish, no steady cheese, no cured pork in Lent. At Droitwich the brine springs steam in cool air. You cross staved platforms where brine boils in iron pans until crystals knife the surface. The sheriff sets the farmed fee, and every sack is counted, cart measured by axle and wheel. Coastal towns pay on imported bay salt. River tolls catch rafts and barges. Revenue is a taste on the tongue. Parchment next. Sheep drift like weather across downs. Flayers scrape skins clean, stretched on frames, hides rasp to a pale, tight sheen. In a lamplit chamber, a clerk pricks margins with an awl and draws lines with lead. Here the king's will becomes thread through the realm. Writs ordering castle repairs, summons for scutage, pardons that cost, forest instructions in a neutral hand that hides sharp teeth. John's court is always moving, horses sweating under baggage, chests of seals, rolls, and portable altars. You ride behind and see the rhythm, audiences at dawn, dinner before noon, charters sealed by afternoon light while the wax is warm. To raise cash for war in France he levies scutage, money instead of knights. Sheriffs squeeze, reeves haggle, and free men count pennies that once measured days of bread. Wardships, reliefs, and fines flow toward the king. Justice is available promptly for a price. Forest law extends like shade over pasture and path. You listen as villagers measure words before they speak of pigs in oak woods or a snared hare near a royal verge. A forester's horn means amercements, the ruinous fines that do not sound like gallows yet empty cottages all the same. In towns, Jews, licensed lenders under the king's protection, record debts on chirographs split by wavy cut. Their chests sit under triple key. In 1210, a tallage falls on them heavy as an iron gate. Over all hangs the papal interdict, years of muffled bells after John quarreled with innocent III. Church doors close, marriages and burials shrink to minimal rites, permissions are rented piecemeal as if grace were another manner. You count the fees, seals, and bargains that turn faith and forest, salt and parchment into coin. Behind each charge stands a payable need. Ships for a channel crossing, mercenaries loyal to silver, castles that eat money one stone at a time. You watch a charter dry on a sanded board and wonder, if the realm is stitched together by debts, what happens when the thread is pulled? The king's needs multiply faster than sheep can grow skins. You ride with the wardrobe clerks, the traveling treasury that pays garrisons and buys oats by quarter. At every halt, purveyors requisition carts, fodder, ale, and candles at the king's price, lower than the market and seldom paid on time. Inns fill with teamsters waiting for tallies to be honored. A carter strokes his ox and decides parchment spends slower than coin. Across the channel lies the loss that drives everything. Normandy gone since 1204, with Anjou and Maine pulled after it like a snagged net. To recover them, John sells exceptions. Scutage again, heavier this time. Amercements scaled not to the fault but the purse. Wardships auctioned, marriages priced. A baron can have justice as promptly as a ton of wine, and both are dear. You watch a sheriff's accounting. Entries for bridge repair, prison upkeep, and debts, because the king so wills. Neat columns become pressure. At the mints, the short cross penny still rings true, but confidence is a rumor as fragile as eggshell. A reeve taps coins on oak. Men weigh pennies in hand scales. Clipped edges travel until someone refuses them in the market. Jews, licensed lenders under royal protection, write debts on chirographs stored in archi. They are taxed in 1210 until chests stand empty and protections feel theoretical. Even parchment has a breaking point when the ink demands too much. The church's quarrel aches beneath daily life. Since the dispute over Stephen Langton, the realm has lived through interdict and excommunication. Bells were silent, save for baptisms and the dying. A fine is due for a burial in blessed ground, another for meat eaten at a wrong hour, another for a license to open a church door. John yields at last, receiving England as a papal fief, yet the habit of fees remains like a lane rutted by old wheels. Then 1214. Flemish weavers whisper the name Bouvines like a weather report. John's diplomacy phrase, the French king's victory snaps the thread. Back in England, you stand in a timber hall where barons count what they have already paid and what they have not received. Hostages, castles, reliefs beyond custom. Line items become grievances, grievances become oaths. In London, apprentices hear talk of liberties and cheer for reasons half practical, half fashionable. The Cinque Ports weigh how many ships their charters owe come spring. In winter there is more mud than law. The king hires Poitevin and Brabançon soldiers, men loyal to wages and the hand that weighs them. Rochester's stones remember the bite of siege engines, and the pork fat used to burn a tower's props. Sheriffs still tally, mills still grind, markets still meet under weathered crosses. Yet everywhere you go, someone folds a hand inside a sleeve and keeps account the rolls do not see. When parchment becomes a battlefield, what sort of peace can ink enforce? By June 1215, the arithmetic of grievance becomes a landscape. You stand at Runnymede, a damp meadow where tents rise like mushrooms. Barons arrive, Londoners bring bread and rumor, royal clerks set out boards, ink, and wax. No one speaks of signing. Instead, there is sealing, cords, parchment, and the heavy matrix bearing a king on his throne. Articles become clauses, clauses become a charter. Clerks write engrossments in a practiced bookhand, sanded to dry. The king's great seal will validate each copy. A meadow becomes an office. The items are practical with edges. Scutage to be taken by common council, not whim. Reliefs returned to custom. Widows left unforced. Fish weirs removed from the Thames to clear traffic. One measure for ale, wine, and cloth. Sheriffs barred from trying pleas reserved to royal justices. Forests to be inquired into. Most famous sits in the middle. No freeman to be taken or imprisoned save by the lawful judgment of peers or by the law of the land. It reads like housekeeping and breathes like a promise. Seals press. Copies travel to sheriffs, bishops, and towns. Oaths are sworn. A council of 25 barons is named to compel performance. The exchequer may reckon as before, but parchment now answers parchment. Within weeks Pope Innocent III annuls the charter as shameful and demeaning, absolving oaths. The meadow's neat lines wrinkle. Tallies snap. Carts crowd the bridge. Yet the ledger's new column is war. The first baron's war writes itself in sieges, wages, and fodder lists. You feel its texture at Rochester, a castle hungry for stone and pork fat, and at Dover where arrears taste of salt. The rebel lords invite Prince Louis of France. Seals change masters. Captains count arrows and lamp oil. On the quays shipmasters haggle over freight for quarrels and horses. War, too, is procurement. In autumn 1216, illness takes the king on the road north. At the Wash, a baggage train sinks into tidal mire. Reliquaries, plate, and maybe a crown vanish beneath gray water. Newark receives him, fever spends him. The chest with the Great Seal will serve another hand. William Marshall, old and exact, becomes regent for 9-year-old Henry. The war continues, then softens under debt and weariness. Victory at Lincoln and a naval checkoff sandwich bend the line back. Reissues follow. In 1216, the charter returns trimmed for wartime. In 1217, it comes again, paired with a separate forest charter that peels royal shadow back from hedgerow and path. In 1225, issued in Henry's own name, it anchors consent to taxation and buys stability with a cleaner promise. Over years, most clauses fade, a few harden, and one, lawful judgment and law of the land, finds new mouths and uses. You leave Westminster's Hall at dusk and hear tallies crack once more. If rights were first written to settle a quarrel over scutage and custody, is their endurance a long receipt, or proof that even a bad rain can accidentally purchase a durable restraint? Story 3. Ivan IV and the Office of Fear. You wake to hooves on frozen ruts outside Alexandrov Sloboda, where the court has decamped with trunks and a movable chancery. A black-cloaked rider leads a horse whose bridle bears a small dog's head and broom, a badge for sniffing out treason and sweeping it away. It is the winter world of Ivan IV, and governance arrives like breath in cold air, visible for a moment, then gone, leaving rules behind. Before fear becomes uniform, there are offices. The Prikizy chancelleries divide work into ledgers, the Posalsky Prikas for foreign letters, the Razriad for military rolls, the Pomesny for land grants, the Streletsky for the musket men paid in salt and coin. Clerks in kaftans copy decrees onto paper or onto birch for cheaper notes. Seals are pressed. Runners carry packets along the Yam, the relay road where fresh horses wait at way stations. Receipts, not proclamations, make the state feel real. In 1550, the Sudebnik revises the law. Fees stated, appeals mapped, punishments noted with bureaucratic dryness. That decade forms the Streltsy as permanent infantry, men in tall hats whose pay arrives late and whose families trade in suburbs. Victory at Kazan in 1552 and Astrakhan in 1556 opens grain and fish down the Volga. Monasteries store surpluses, functioning as granaries and banks with ledgers listing rents in rye and wax. Across the court, a printer inks Cyrillic type, Russia's first press, a device that lets orders multiply. Then the Oprichnina. In 1565, the realm is split into Zemshchina and the Tsar's special domain. Confiscations follow lists. Boyar houses are emptied by inventory. Peasants, counted as dues rather than voices, are reassigned with the meadows they mow. Oprichniki ride black horses and keep their own chancery. Wages, fodder, and salt are itemized with the same care as arrests. Towns feel the arithmetic. Markets thin. Craft guilds drift. Tax rolls struggle to keep names attached to places that belong to someone else. The Livonian War eats metal, wood, and endurance. Cannons require powder. Powder requires saltpeter. Saltpeter requires leached earth, barrels, and time. Merchants on the northern routes price sails and pitch in thalers and Muscovy dinghy. English traders of the Muscovy Company bargain for furs while calculating risk. The treasury shaves coins and raises levies. Arrears chase the Streltsy. The Yam runs slower when horses are requisitioned for sieges. In 1570, the procession to Novgorod is recorded in things more than words. Bells taken down, stores seized, lists of suspected treason read in monotone. Monastery barns are opened and their contents counted, rye by the chetvert, honey by the pood, candles by the sheaf. A city's life is turned into numbers, then into punishment. When it ends, estates are reassigned again, and the ledgers try to catch a moving country. You warm your hands above a brazier and listen to the scratch of a clerk's quill. If terror is rooted through offices and pay chests, does it change the fabric of rule, or only the names written at the tops of the lists? You keep traveling with the moving chancery, where decisions ride in boxes of wax, seals, and salted rye for the road. The Zemsky Sabor is summoned, delegates from towns and nobility shuffling into a cold hall to grant levies in kind, oats, arrows, cart parts, sheepskin coats. Lists are longer than speeches. A clerk ticks columns labeled Tiaglo, burdens, apportioned to households whose names change each winter. The state, like a mill, needs grain even when the river is low. The Livonian campaigns lengthen until they touch Sweden, Poland, Lithuania, and hands ports that price rope by the fathom. You stand at a customs post where poshlani are recorded, tariffs for salt, tar, and cloth written in cramped Cyrillic. Ivan's diplomacy grows brittle, yet the post stamps barrels with chalk and receipts. Muscovite coins are shaved to stretch payroll. Merchants answer with scales, while soldiers accept arrears and another promissory note from the Razriad clerk who never smiles. Horses go lame, so the yam demands remounts from villages thin of hay. Monasteries act as warehouses with prayers, their barns measured by the sazhen, their cellars stacked with dried fish. In lean seasons, plans are copied twice, once for order, once after carts fail. The printer Ivan Fedorov flees court politics and debt, his press migrating like a stork. Copies of the Apostle circulate, proof that ink can outrun fear. Then the South tears open. Crimean Tatar riders cross the steppe seams. In 1571, Moscow burns as wind turns lanes into chimneys. You count losses not by monuments but by inventories, icons, ropes, axes, loaves, bedding. The next year at Melody, the wooden field fort, the Guliigorod, locks into place, pikes brace, arquebuses thrum. Survival is carpentry before it is glory. The oprichnina, already fraying, is abolished. Offices knit back together with the seam of a hurried repair. Peasants drift, hunting better landlords and safer granaries. To stop the leak, decrees narrow the old right to move at St. George's Day. Zapovnai Godi, forbidden years, suspend departures. Passes are checked at fords, priests certify households. A peasant's name becomes an anchor on lists. Security bought this way is thin, like ice that holds only if you step lightly and keep silent. Foreign artisans arrive under contract to cast guns and cut finer threads on screws. Some leave by night when pay fails. The court experiments with trading companies and marriages, hopeful lines written in sand and salt. Along the border palisades, watchmen count fires in the distance and measure duty in nights awake. Towns are rebuilt on the same alignments as before. A good plan is cheaper than new thinking. Winter comes early and candles burn lower in cold offices. You sit with a lay brother in a storeroom and write what endures. Ledgers, roads, a tighter hand on peasants, a habit of taking by list. If fear has become a routine, budgeted, receded, what happens to the soul of a country when terror reads like housekeeping? Spring returns thin and gray, and you sit with a scribe who trims quills to a measured angle, the way habit survives weather. The Livonian War winds down into truces that read like balance sheets. Yamzapolski with Poland-Lithuania in 1582, Plusa with Sweden in 1583. Terms are practical, fortresses listed, borders traced by rivers and marshes, winter roads named for closure or passage. The chancery binds copies with cords. Receipts for messengers are pinned like fish on a line. Ivan's household contracts contract too. After the death of his heir Dmitri in childhood and the murder of his stronger son Ivan Ivanovich in 1581, continuity becomes a problem written in narrow columns. Who owes service? Who can command? Who will be paid from which storehouse? Fedor, gentle and pious, stands next in a robe too heavy for his shoulders. Boris Godunov's handwriting begins appearing in the margins, offering substitutions, reallocations, small savings painful to trace. Town markets, prices adjust to losses. Salt and iron cost more because convoys cost more. Furs flow out and coin flows in, lighter every year. The Streltsy drill, log their rations, and visit parishes to register newborn sons for future service. Peasant flight remains a running total, nobody reads aloud. The Zapovnai Godi become a habit, instruments first of emergency, then of memory. What was once a temporary rule is recopied so often it feels like custom, and custom hardens. When the Tsar dies in 1584 at the Kremlin, death is recorded the same way as a tax: date, hour, witnesses. Bells sound, candles are issued from stores. Inventories of his possessions are drawn up in precise hand, robes, icons, weapons, then redistributed according to orders that look like shopping lists. Fedor is proclaimed. The oprichnina is gone, yet its habits remain. separate treasuries, parallel loyalties, a taste for governing by exception. Years after, a famine will come and the realm will stumble into the time of troubles. Those events are downstream. Here at the desk, you study the older current, bureaucracy sutured to fear, improvisation written as law. The state has more paper now, registers of land, labor, and oath, than it had when the reign began. It has fewer townspeople, fewer skilled hands, and a broader reflex for closing doors when carts approach. You walk the rebuilt streets and count small things: the spacing of palisade stakes, the heft of a bread loaf in a cold palm, the soot on a cup after weak tea. Survival is a ledger before it becomes a flag. Ivan's greatness and cruelty are debated in monasteries, embassies, and kitchens, but all agree on this texture: a rain poured into forms that keep their shape after the pourer is gone. Paper remembers even when tired people forget. If a country learns to translate fear into forms, stamps, and rations, what story do those forms tell when calmer rulers inherit them? And how long before the paperwork begins to think for itself? Story 4. Charles VI of France and the Paper Crown of Madness. You wake in Paris to wet stone and ink, the smell of a city that thinks on parchment. Charles VI reigns, sometimes lucid, sometimes absent. On the absent days, red-ruled vellum carries weight. You pass the chatelet where clerks copy ordinances, then the Palais de la Cité where the Parliament registers edicts in rooms warmed by smoking braziers. Authority is a rubric and a seal impressed while the wax is still soft. Money has a fever. The mint lowers fineness, the blanc grows paler, merchants carry touchstones and small scales in felt sleeves. When coin fails, the crown turns to extraordinary levies, the tail on households, the aids on wine and ale, and the salt gabelle that channels crystals through royal granaries. In warehouses, barrels are sealed with chalk marks. Sworn officers measure by the minot. Carters sign for loads before wheels meet mud. You stop at the Cour des Comptes, where auditors teach hope to count. Ledgers follow the royal household from abbey to manor, listing candles, oats, harness grease, pepper, and alms. The royal wardrobe, an office, not a closet, pays stipends, launders debts, and issues cloth by the ell. In 1388, the marmosets, capable counselors, restore routines. Farms rebid, tolls inventoried, exemptions reviewed. Then in 1392, a hunting ride turns. The king rages at imagined traitors. The council rearranges itself around doctors, uncles, confessors, and oaths. On good days he knows Isabel. On bad days he fears he is glass and will shatter if touched. Governance becomes choreography. Princes of the blood, Burgundy, Orleans, Berry, compete for proximity to the seal, for appointment lists, for the right to place stewards in kitchens and treasuries. The Parliament, cautious, registers what is presented with the clause seen, heard, and published. Edicts continue. Intention flickers. Paris trades while factions sharpen knives. Butchers in the Grand Boucherie keep their privileges. Drapers argue over wage ceilings that creep like ivy. Wine merchants watch the aids and adjust measures. In 1393, the Bal des Ardents turns festivity into a case file. Fabric, pitch, torch distances, salves. Chroniclers write shock. The accounts record linen, oils, and physicians' fees. The city sells bread at sunrise all the same. Beyond the walls, tax farmers call at diocesan doors. In Champagne, tollkeepers check axle widths at bridges. In Rouen, salt officers break seals and test damp loads. In Toulouse, the estates of Languedoc bargain for rates in careful Occitan while Paris calculates in haste. Coin moves like weather. Arrears are a season everyone learns to endure. You warm your hands above a brazier while a clerk blots ink with sand. Decisions wait in folders for the days when the king's mind returns. On other days, signatures travel without him. Clerks keep copying carefully. If a crown must rest on documents when a mind cannot hold it, what kind of sovereignty lies between the press of a seal and the silence of the man it represents? You follow account books south to Languedoc, where estates still negotiate subsidies. Delegates insist on seeing arrears, remissions, and the last audit before granting a new aid. Everything becomes conditional. payment after harvest, collection in kind where coin is scarce, exemptions for towns that repaired walls or bridged a river. In Paris, Cour des Comptes tallies each promise, marking margins with careful sums that assume delays. Back north, factions tint the ink. After 1407, when Louis of Orleans is killed, receipts and ordinances begin to wear badges. Burgundian clerks inventory grain stores and uniforms for guild militias. Armagnac scribes list oaths, pardons, and the cost of quartering allies. The provost of Paris bargains over watch rotations with Butchers' Guild. City government becomes a schedule stamped at dawn. Universities argue while steelyards count. The Great Schism lets theologians compose opinions on obedience and taxation. Meanwhile, tavern keepers price ale by the pint and watch the aids rise. Coinage reform comes and goes. New ordinances promise stronger fineness, then war pulls the pillars out again. Merchants keep touchstones ready. A clerk in Tours writes to Rouen, weigh twice, pay once, avoid clipped blancs like wet firewood. The Queen's household moves by rule. Isabeau's stewards issue cloth by the ell, bread by the settier, wax by the pound. Stipends are posted where servants sign with marks. On clear days the king appears and payments flow faster. On other days seals travel without him, and vendors demand arrears with polite repetition. Household ordinances attempt thrift. Fewer courses at dinner, shorter liveries, a winter rule on candle hours. In 1413, the Cabatian Rising turns reform into a docket. The Burgundian party, backed by butchers and artisans, pushes ordinances to clean offices and standardize accounts. No sale of posts, shorter terms, audits of receivers, registers kept in duplicate. For weeks clerks copy, then the coalition cracks and many pages are shelved. Some habits remain, more signatures, clearer headings, because routine is harder to uproot than law. War tidies choices. In 1415, Henry of England lands, pays cash and counts barrels neatly. Agincourt writes itself into ledgers as pensions lost, captains missing, ransoms due, and fields left unharvested. The crown borrows against future aids. Royal officers canvass towns for loans, leaving acknowledgments tied with green threads. Carters write that roads break under autumn rain. Receivers petition to substitute salt for coin. By 1418, Paris opens its gates to the Burgundians. The Armagnac jail is sacked. The city's books continue, knotting repairs and price of lime to scrub blood. Governance endures as cleaning lists. In 1420, the Treaty of Troyes is engrossed. Seals for Henry, for Isabeau, for a quiet king. It reads like guardianship papers, inheritance scheduled, councils named, deliveries of towns pledged. If the crown is increasingly a sheaf of ordinances passed between hands, which hand truly holds France? The one that keeps the seal, or the one that keeps the keys to the granary? After Troyes in 1420, the kingdom lives on paper. You read warrants nomming Henry of England regent and heir, his marriage to Catherine written beside delivery schedules for towns and garrisons. In Paris, the Chambre des Comptes balances pensions to allies against arrears to suppliers. Clerks note that barrels of wine move even when kings do not. In 1419, John the Fearless falls at Montereau. The line in the register is brief, yet its echo is long, because Burgundy turns to England and the seal follows interest. Henry pays in coin in contracts in certainty of audit, and armies move as items on lists. His habit is orderly, rations counted, sieges budgeted, captains drilled in receipts. Then 1422 shortens ledgers. In late summer, Henry dies at Vincennes. In autumn, Charles VI dies in Paris. Two funerals cross the page. An infant, Henry VI, is proclaimed in Paris, while the Dauphin Charles keeps Bourges, a capital of receipts more than ceremony. The Duke of Bedford governs numbers from Rouen. The Duke of Gloucester mines England. The books continue. Ordinary Paris holds its breath and sells bread. English garrisons quarter by tariff. Guilds restore schedules. The university debates obedience. Scribes copy proclamations that sound the same no matter whose lion or lilies top the page. Scarcity sharpens gestures. Bakers mix rye with wheat. Butchers bargain for tallow. Candles are shortened by ordinance in winter. To pay, receivers pawn future aids. Loans are acknowledged with threads the color of hope rather than law. In 1429, rumor gains a face. The siege of Orleans lifts. Carts roll toward Reims with wax, oil, and cloth for a coronation that is as much logistics as miracle. At Reims, barrels are opened, bells paid for ringing, and a king is made credible in the old way so that taxes in the new way can be demanded with a steadier quill. The English hold Paris. The French hold the right. The ledgers hold both, waiting for alliances to catch up with ritual. Reform grows in small, durable fibers. Auditors insist on duplicate registers. Receivers are rotated. Purveyance is narrowed to slow theft disguised as duty. The crown begins to imagine standing companies and assigned districts, ideas that will mature under Charles VII but are already penciled in margins. Burgundy, counting profits, trades allegiance in 1435 at Arras. Ink dries slowly, yet caravans at once find safer roads and collectors discover fewer closed shutters. Charles VI is gone, but his reign lingers wherever a seal stands in for a mind. He leaves habits of registration, councils that meet without certainty of kingship, and a capital practiced in obeying documents while doubting voices. By the time Paris returns to Valois hands in 1436, the city knows how to move under new signatures with the old street map. You close a register and listen to the rasp of sand over wet ink, wondering how modern a monarchy becomes when institutions learn to walk without the person who once wore the crown, and whether, in such a state, the paper rules the king or the king rules the paper. Story 5. Yang of Sway and the Canal that Unraveled an Empire. You wake to the thud of shovels and the hiss of wet reed mats along a cut of earth that will become water. It is the Sway, early 7th century, and the emperor's engineers pace the ground with cords knotted at fixed lengths. Surveyors carry sighting poles. Clerks scratch columns on bamboo and silk. Overseers tally laborers by household registers. The order is simple on paper. Dig here, deepen there. Link river to river until barges can carry grain north like a slow, reliable tide. At Luoyang, the new eastern capital, stone is measured in blocks, timber in spans, and labor in days owed. Corvée lists are copied in neat hands. So many men from one commandery for 1 month, with spares for when fever or flight eats numbers. Rations are portioned, millet by the hu, salt by weight, cloth by the bolt. Wazhu coins clink, but most payment is grain and time. A foreman tests clay by squeeze. A boatwright checks planks where sap still threads the grain. The canal has parts, each a ledger of its own. Northward, a line toward the Yellow River. Eastward, channels that will touch the Bayan and the Old Way. Southward, work that will reach the Yangtze and the lower lakes. Locks are carpentry before they are majesty. Gates planed smooth, pins greased with animal fat, spillways measured to a patient slope. Dredgers learn the flavor of silt from each reach. Warehouse keepers chalk marks on sacks moving north. Grain tax transformed into floating pay for soldiers on the frontier. Everything scales. Milestones in li, quotas in headcounts, penalties in days. The equal field system meant to allot land fairly becomes also a counting frame for labor. A field measured is a body summoned. Granaries provision the road crews. Ever-normal stores buffer shortages, but distance magnifies neat promises into frayed practice. A missed delivery here multiplies into hunger there. Counties borrow men from neighbors and promise to reconcile later. Later never quite arrives. War interrupts, then demands more. Draft calls for the Goguryeo campaigns ride the same couriers as canal orders. Carts leave with spades and return with arrows. Boatyards refit grain barges as troop carriers. Market towns sell oars, rope, and lamp oil. Inns add straw to floors for the overflow. The emperor tour in ceremony, petitions are staged. The river glints. Behind him, clerks revise charts where banks collapsed and crews failed. You sit with a scribe as he copies rosters by lamplight, his brush careful, his tea cold. On the wall hangs a schedule of quotas that looks reasonable at dawn and impossible by dusk. If a canal is a spreadsheet carved into earth, precise, useful, and heavy, What happens to the country when the numbers move faster than the people who must carry them? You travel with inspectors who speak in measures. A lock is healthy if its gates seat without splash, unhealthy if hemp seems drink more water than a crew can bail by bucket. Ledgers list cordage by coil, oak pins by dozen, lamp oil by gin. County magistrates arrive pale, their rosters neat in ink and wrong in truth. To meet quotas, they borrow names from old registers or sell exemptions, Mayanfu fees that turn labor into coin for those who have coin. The canal deepens on paper faster than in clay. Rations move like sentences. A boatman receives millet, salt, and dried greens at scheduled depots. When a depot fails, he breaks the schedule into hunger. Evernormal granaries release grain at set prices, but carts sink in late rains and tallies arrive to empty bins. Workshops near Luyang Plain planks for gates and barges. Wheelwrights talk about sap content the way doctors talk about pulse. A carpenter measures twice and shaves once. An overseer, hurried, measures once and shouts twice. North of the Yellow River, the Yangtze Reach runs straight as a clerk's rule. Patrol barges check cargo seals, then count oars to keep crews whole. Silt budgets appear in margins. Extra labor each spring when less slides off fields and into channels. Boatmen argue for more mooring posts, fewer festivals that halt traffic, and locks closed at night only if the wind falls. Every improvement writes a new obligation somewhere else. Then war and water cross ledgers. Draft orders for the Goguryeo campaigns, tents, arrows, fodder by who, shoes by pair, travel the same couriers as canal reports. Grain earmarked for garrisons floats north. Relief dredging is postponed 1 month, then 2. Muster lists grow, and so do fevers. At Commandery, the mustering yards smell of horse sweat and wet rope. Along the Liao, carts with siege parts share fords with barges dragged on skids. Reports say roads hold. Reports always say roads hold. Failures are written in substitutions. When convoys stall, clerks propose equivalents. Timber instead of cash, silk instead of millet, pledges instead of either. You read a tidy memorial from a prefect who recommends moving deadlines rather than moving earth. He is promoted for prudence. In the same week, a crew downstream lashes planks with bark because hemp is late, and the gate leaks enough to drown a lamp. Rumor hardens into record. Yang Xuangan's revolt near Luyang in 613, raised from troops meant for Korea, supplied at first by stores meant for locks. Counties hedge, citing flood, tax fatigue, and missing men. Fugitives learn to follow canal banks by night. Abandoned fields stipple the margins of maps. At court, dragon barges display the finished stretches. Prows carved like phoenixes, banks whitened with lime, purple pennants counting victories that the manifests do not confirm. You stand on a towpath at dusk while a grain convoy slides north, silent as thought. When a state turns roads into rivers and then asks those rivers to be armies, how long before the water obeys the current of rebellion instead of the plan? By the last years of sway, schedules look complete even as crews thin. Memorials report work substantially finished on the Yangtze and Tangye reaches. The inspector's brush draws circles where locks align, posts seated, pins greased, depots stocked. You walk the towpath and see the other account. Missing oxen, patched boots, and names borrowed from retired rosters to satisfy quotas. The canal moves grain. It also moves rumors along a smooth road of water. Campaigns against Goguryeo continue to drain the column titled surplus. In 612, an army counted in the hundreds of thousands crosses with pontoon bridges and portable granaries. Returns are counted in arrears, frostbite, and broken carts. In 613, Yang Xuangan rises near Luyang. Suppression consumes stores earmarked for dredging. In 614, after a negotiated submission, orders for another push still circulate, because intentions travel faster than repairs. In 615, near Yanmen, steppe horsemen hem the court inside mountain passes. Couriers gallop and ink grows tight and small on the page where rations are recalculated. Relay stations. The Yi feel the weight. Fresh horses, lamp oil, straw, and paper multiply across the map like beads on a cord. Ever-normal granaries release grain at stabilizing prices that fail to stabilize when carts bog and boats wait for higher water. County magistrates learn to combine burdens. One levy for canal labor, one for soldiers' boots, one for palace tour where dragon prows demonstrate prosperity by consuming it. Fishermen along backwaters sell rope in silence. The canal works where it is meant to work. Barges from the Yangtze Basin climb locks to feed troops near the passes. Rice reaches northern markets that once saw only millet. Warehouse clerks stamp seals. Inspectors measure butt-ends of timber. Pilots read wind against reed. But the arithmetic of a system requires room for failure, and here the margins are narrow. Floods silt during the Yellow River's moods. Drought pinches elsewhere. A temporary rise in corvée becomes the new base figure by the next copying. Revolt spreads in the space between tidy reports and muddy shoes. Li Mi, then Du Giant, gather men along supply paths, the very order of depots, grain, rope, lamp oil, maps where rebels can live for weeks. Li Yuan, governor at Taiyuan, studies rosters, sends a courteous memorial, then crosses a pass and claims a mandate older than any dredging schedule. In 618, at Jiangdu, officers led by Yuan Huaji strangle the emperor in a lakeside pavilion whose inventory lists silk hangings and lacquered trays. The canal continues to carry grain under new seals, because water obeys gradient before it obeys dynasties. Under the early Tang, the waterway is repaired and extended, its usefulness undeniable, its lesson plainer still. An empire may bind itself together with locks, depots, and rosters, and yet unbind its loyalty by overfilling those ledgers with demands. You leave the towpath at dusk while barges slide past like sentences, each clause correct, the whole argument exhausted. If grand infrastructure is a promise carved into earth, how carefully must a ruler ration the promise, so the people who keep it do not learn to keep it for someone else. Story 6. Ibrahim I and the Weight of Velvet. You wake to the quiet accounting of cloth. In the Ottoman palace, the Defterhane counts robes the way a mint counts coins, by weight, weave, and season. Bolts of Bursa silk and velvet arrive under guard. Dyers' notes are pinned to selvages. The treasurer's clerk chalks an initial on each bale before it passes to the inner wardrobe. Ibrahim sits on the throne in 1640, and the state's pulse can be felt in textile allotments. Caftans for envoys, brocade for festivals, sable-trimmed coats for favored officers. Luxury is not rumor, it is a receipt. Outside the palace, the chancery copies Muhim decrees that travel to provinces by courier. Avariz taxes, once extraordinary, have become routine. Cash Levi's substitute for the corvée, the way a tailor substitutes lining when cloth runs short. Customs officials at Galata weigh pepper, indigo, and Venetian glass. Scribes list silk yarn by oak and assess a due per skein. The axe trembles, its silver thinned by long habit, and tradesmen answer with scales in their sleeves. Janissary paydays, the uluf distributions, are scheduled like eclipses. When arrears creep, the barracks listen. Guilds feel the court's preferences as weather. Furriers stock ermine, sable, and lynx from northern caravans. The Sieb Guild tallies collars for winter livery. Velvet weavers argue over warp counts. The nar, the official price schedule, is posted on a mosque wall and read aloud by a beadle. In the arsenal, shipwrights plane timbers for galleys. Rope is tarred. Biscuit ovens test batches for the siege season. When the treasury cannot stretch coin, it stretches obligations. A promise to pay from Egypt's grain surplus. A pledge to redeem a shortfall after the convoy from Alexandria arrives. In 1644, the seas write a preface to war. Knights seize an Ottoman ship in the Aegean. Petitions thicken. The divan meets. The Cretan War opens with ledgers, oars counted, cannon issued, biscuit weighed. Chania falls in 1645 under careful procurement. Powder casks tallied, lime bought to set quick repairs, surgeons assigned at a ratio 1 per so many ranks. A new expense enters the books and does not leave for a generation. In the harem, the Valide Sultan's steward issues daily lists, candles, rose water, textiles, payable in cash and influence. Court spending stirs markets. Suddenly sable doubles, velvet triples, and brokers borrow against the palace's appetite. The Grand Vizier pushes for thrift. A coffeehouse poet mutters that caftans multiply when coin divides. The treasury redeems old timber stipends with cash and asks provinces for avarice in tighter cycles. Provincial scribes write that grain is dear and coin dearer. You pause by a shop where a tailor clips a pattern from imported velvet, the scrap saved for a cap band. The empire still moves, barley measured, convoys escorted, orders registered, but fabric has weight and weight tugs. If a throne can be felt in inventories of fur and silk as much as in forts and fleets, how do the quiet pressures of wardrobe and payroll begin to bend the harder iron of policy? You follow ledgers beyond the wardrobe where cash replaces cavalry. After long wars, the timber land for service has thinned. In its gaps rises iltizam, tax farms auctioned each year. Bidder's promise sums up front for the right to collect customs at bridges, ferries, salt pans, and market gates. In the defter, each mukata is a line with margins for arrears. A careful collector sends grain and coin. A greedy one sends petitions. Provincial scribes learn to write both. Contracts are brief, obligations long, receipts travel, and disputes return with witnesses who remember weights. At the mint, the axe shrinks by measures too small for proclamations and too large for shop scales to ignore. Copper mangyr coins appear more often. Good silver vanishes into hoards or abroad. The nar posts ceiling prices for bread, oil, and cloth. Bakers swear to weights, then hedge with moisture and heat. Janissaries line for uluf. The treasurer pays in clipped silver and promises the rest after convoys arrive. A murmur in barracks is an entry no book records, yet every clerk can hear it, and every innkeeper prices stew as though rumor were a tax. War with Venice hardens habits. The arsenal tallies biscuit by the chest, water casks by stave, pitch by barrel. Convoys thread the Dardanelles under layered orders. Sail at dawn, hug the Asian shore, scatter only if oars break. Venetian galleys haunt the straits like footnotes that cannot be erased. Chania, taken, demands garrison lists, lime for walls and surgeons on stipend. Candia, held at distance, becomes a calendar of attempted reliefs measured in rope, pira timber, and winter gales. Dockyards requisition oak from Anatolian hills. Rope walks lengthen hemp into miles. Inside the palace, decisions pile like folded textiles. The Valide Sultan weighs petitions. Agas control doors and stipends. The Grand Vizier pushes economies that die in antechambers scented with amber. Ibrahim's tastes, furs in summer, special linings, gifts of brocade, turn into policy because warehouses must answer them. The Fur Guild seeks quotas. Northern caravans lengthen. Sables arrive dearer. The court replies with new iltizam on customs to cover the difference, steering collectors to squeeze markets already thin. Merchants see profits that refuse to become coin. Bookkeepers balance columns by moving pain into next quarter's line. In the provinces, avarice assessments collide with drought. Tax farmers advance cash at interest. Villagers pay in goatskins when coin fails. The ledger converts skins into silver at a hopeful rate that never matches market. Judges arbitrate with fetvas. To bridge shortfalls, the treasury draws drafts on future customs and Egyptian grain convoys, bundles arrears, and schedules redemptions after the fleet returns. The harem lists candles reduced by hour. The arsenal lists rope increased by fathom. Somewhere the sums should meet. They do not. You read a new price schedule at dawn. If the empire is stitched by contracts more than by vows, which thread snaps first when confidence, not coin, must pay the soldiers? Winter takes its inventory first. Candles shortened, felt cloaks issued, biscuit baked harder for voyages delayed by headwinds. You watch the uluf payday bend into apology, coin light, explanations heavy. Janissaries calculate arrears by meal, not by month. In markets, the nar is read aloud. Bakers nod, then adjust dough with water a little warmer, loaves a little smaller. The mint's dyes soften from use. Mangyr copper multiplies. Good Good silver turns shy, hidden in belts and cellars. Discontent travels by list. In 1648 the SNF, guilds with ledgers for dues and rules for tools, join voices with soldiers. Petition becomes tumult with bookkeeping attached. What is owed, what was promised, which receiver signed. The Valide Sultan weighs risk on one scale and arrears on another. Palace doors become thresholds of policy. Ibrahim, surrounded by soft things that feel like certainty, sables, brocades, lined tents, finds the arithmetic outside less soft. The divan writes memoranda, the barracks write outcomes. A deposition is scheduled as precisely as a convoy. He falls. A fetva legitimizes removal. The seal meets a new hand. Maimed IV is a child. Regency writes thrift on paper and finds extravagance embedded in habit. The Cretan War continues to count rope and powder. The treasury continues to count hopes redeemed next quarter. In coffeehouses, men rehearse coin types on tabletops. In villages, tax farmers press for avarice that has forgotten it was ever extraordinary. The empire still moves, but like a heavy garment tugged at each hem. Then a corrective that is also a memory of stricter times. In 1656, Kurpulu Maimed Pasha accepts the Grand Vizierate on the condition that his orders be obeyed as written. Receipts harden, audits sharpen, captains learn that lists now walk in step with punishments. The Dardanelles are forced, convoys breathe, Candia holds out but the ledger lines stop wandering. Debit meets credit with fewer fictions. Not mercy, mercy is not the word on these pages, but balance returns briefly. You close a defter and feel its grain. Hide turn to numbers, numbers turn to authority, authority turning back to hide when power fails. Ibrahim's reign leaves no grand code, no new fortress that bears his name more loudly than others. It leaves a caution about light coin and heavy cloth, about salaries paid with rumor, about wars conducted by price schedules as much as by plans. The empire endures because warehouses exist and ships can be counted, and it staggers because warehouses can be emptied and ships can be promised twice. You step into a lane where tailors trim velvet on quiet mornings and janissaries pass in pairs at dusk. If governance can drift toward fabric, fee, and favor so gradually that it feels like weather, how do later rulers teach the sky to clear? And how long before the careful reader hears the old rustle of unpaid cloth beneath new proclamations? Story 7. Charles II of Spain and the Inheritance of Silence. You wake in the Alcazar of Madrid to the dry whisper of papers slid across a felted table. Charles II is king in name, but much of Spain runs through hands that stamp and countersign. The Consejo de Castilla, the Hacienda for taxes, the Indies Council tracing silver on maps. On the worst days the king speaks little, on all days the registers speak for him. In corridors, scribes carry bundles tied with green thread, the color of loans and hopes. Money is two metals and a problem. Vellon, copper coin, grew fat in earlier reigns, prices swelled to meet it. Silver, the peso from Potosi and Zacatecas, still anchors accounts, but fleets arrive thinner, later, and sometimes not at all. In Seville, where the Casa de la Contratación keeps ledgers, pilots swear tonnage. Notaries list chests sealed with wax identical in color to last year and lighter in truth. Merchants quietly prefer Cadiz, whose road to the sea is shorter than the silting Guadalquivir. The Averia, a convoy tax, is assessed, escorts are hired, storms ignore receipts. At court, regency and favorites write policy. Mariana of Austria holds councils. Don Juan José de Austria barges in with soldiers and a budget. Later, the Count of Oropsa draws neat lines through expenses, trims sinecures, reforms coin, and posts ordinances requiring bakers to keep weights honest. The relief is real and temporary. Reform is a bridge with missing planks. Alcabalas, the sales tax, nibbles at every exchange. The Millones, extraordinary levies on ordinary goods, make wine and oil taste of arithmetic. The army is a ledger before it is a drum. Old tercios are names on pension lists. New regiments are planned with tables of shoes and matches, salt beef and biscuit. Garrisons from Flanders to Oran request the Situato, remittances from American treasuries that cross the ocean slowly and vanish when raids and weather intervene. A fortress holds if its paymaster arrives. Loyalty, measured in reals, keeps time less evenly than bells. In Castilian towns, guilds measure cloth by the vara and time by arrears. A weaver substitutes a slightly coarser thread when Velan crowds the till. A baker lightens loaves by a finger's width and hopes the inspector's rule is tired. In the countryside, the Millons push small wine presses toward untaxed corners. Notaries draft pleas for exemptions with practiced quills. In Aragon and Valencia furos, regional rights, speak their own legal grammar. Madrid hears, hesitates, and files. Abroad, France leans on borders and treaties. The 9 years' war will come. For now there are pensions to princes and partition plans whispered by ambassadors who treat the monarchy as an estate to be appraised. The king's body becomes a memorandum. Physicians list diets and reliquaries. Confessors list prayers. Ministers list heirs with maps beside them. Silence thickens where decisions should sit. You watch a clerk dust a page with sand and wonder. If a monarchy learns to live by councils, receipts, and the hope of the next fleet, who exactly decides its future? The men with seals, or the winds between Veracruz and Sanlúcar? You follow the money where it actually moves. A long table stacked with giros, perpetual annuities that sip revenue before it reaches a soldier's bowl. Receivers in Valladolid and Toledo read from slates. First the giros, then the alcabalas, then whatever crumbs may cross to garrisons. A reforming hand, Oropses, orders audits, cancels dead pensions, and lowers the face value of bad Velan. Edicts proclaim recoinage, counters stamp marks. Shopkeepers reply with scales and shrugs. Copper returns as change. Real silver hides in drawers lined with old baptism ribbons. Seville's Casa de la Contratación still stamps papers, but you stand on the quay at Cadiz because shippers do. Silting makes the Guadalquivir a ledger of sand, and the ocean prefers the shorter line. The flota sails late. Insurance rates rise. The Aviria is reassessed. In Veracruz, officials tie cord around chests, measure, seal, and pray about storms and corsairs who never read ordinances. When the fleet is thin, the Situato to Flanders and Milan is thinner. A frontier learns to count candles. At home, famine years sharpen ink. Harvests falter in the 1690s. Bakers plead for grain at a price the poor can pay. Ordinances fix loaf weights. Inspectors carry iron rules. Ovens produce what the market will bear, a line narrower each week. Madrid hears hoofbeats of mule trains creaking under Castilian wheat and Andalusian oil. The city also hears its own stomach. People give the unrest a calendar name. Summer when prices climb too fast. Winter when charity lists prove too short. Coin tricks cannot outrun bread. Velan devaluations are posted in churches. Sermons explain obedience while pockets explain velocity. Prices lift like a slow tide. The Count of Oropsa trims court pages, prunes offices, and attempts to redeem giros with cash he does not have. The relief is real at the edges, some arrears paid, some scales steadied, and insufficient at the center, where the monarchy still spends yesterday's income on tomorrow's promises. War steals arithmetic and returns invoices. From 1688 to 9 years, war pulls at the Netherlands and Catalonia. You read a requisition for shoes, matches, salt beef, and wagon grease. The signature is neat, the roads are not. In 1697, Barcelona falls after a measured siege. The bill lists fascines, powder, boats, and days. The Treasury writes to be reimbursed from America, and America answers with a convoy smaller than the line reserved for it in the account. In Madrid, the year 1699 ripens and snaps. Bread prices protest the gnar from the street upward. The Motin de los Gatos rattles shutters and ministers. Oropsa falls. A new favorite arranges the same debts in a different column. Councils meet. The king's health is copied each morning by men who learned medicine in Latin and politics in whispers. The succession question swells to fill maps. France and Austria sharpen quills and knives. You watch a clerk tie a packet with green thread. and wonder whether any thread can be strong enough to bind a body that trembles and a realm that borrows breath. Succession becomes paperwork shaped like a map. You sit in a cool chamber while counselors weigh 3 bundles, partition treaties drafted abroad, a Bavarian child's claim already erased by death, and a last will that would keep the monarchy whole. Cardinal Portocarrero stacks memoranda. The Council of State votes, tallies sealed in envelopes. Ambassadors write home in ciphers. Physicians list remedies beside the king's breakfast. Confessors list prayers beside remedies. Notaries list heirs beside prayers. The monarchy lives as columns, territories, pensions, ships, balanced against a body that trembles. On ships, manifest the empire still looks ample. From Veracruz and Portobelo, silver chests are tied with cords measured to regulation. Registry marks match last year, though the cargo seems lighter to the men who lifted both. Cadiz clerks note winds and insurance. Seville clerks note tradition and silk. Viceroys in Mexico City and Lima receive packets with identical words and different prospects. Proclaim, swear oaths, keep accounts, pay troops even if the convoy fails. Reform continues as housekeeping. Orops's cuts, dismissed, are resurrected in fragments by men who dislike admitting it. Inventories of offices, shorter liveries, stricter weights for loaves, fewer torches for processions. Velan is called in and recoined. The mince dies heat and cool. Shopkeepers keep scales regardless of ordinances. The crown shaves a little from juros where contracts allow. Creditors protest with Latin and patience. A famine year teaches more obedience than a proclamation. A thin fleet teaches more caution than a catechism. Diplomacy folds numbers into courtesy. Partition schemes promise this duchy for that island, a barrier here for a pension there. Every line assumes a king who can sign and a people who will accept. In 1700, the decision hardens. The will names Philip of Anjou, a Bourbon grandson, to inherit all, no division of realms, no slicing of ledgers, so that one administration may continue to stamp, weigh, and remit. Copies are made on heavy parchment. Seals take their impression. Writers fly. On November 1, 1700, the registers write his death like any other. Hour, witnesses, distribution of candles, number of masses. The Alcazar opens its stores for funeral cloth. The treasury schedules stipends for chant. The city posts a nar for bread so the bakeries will not seize the moment. Portocarrero ushers the oath for Felipe. Chanceries write, Our Lord the King, with a new name and the same obligations. Abroad, ledgers sharpen into armies. At home, the casa counts chests and hopes the sea keeps faith. You watch a clerk tie a decree with green thread and carry it toward the courtyard light. If a vast monarchy can persist as a habit of accounts from reign to reign, what truly changes when the signature at the bottom alters? Only the flourish or the sum. Story 8. Mohammed bin Tughlaq and the coins that melted trust. You wake in Delhi to hoofbeats and ink, where the Diwan-i Wizrat counts grain and coin with the same dry patience. Mohammed bin Tughlaq rules, quick in mind and quick in decree. Couriers on the Barid road swap satchels at relays. Scribes copy orders on paper and palm leaf. Accountants weigh revenues from iktas. Land assignments owed in cash and grain. In the Doab between Gunga and Yamuna, collectors assess harvests by gaz and man, promising rates that sound fair in cool offices and feel impossible when rains fail. The capital slides south by command. In 1327, carts creaked toward Dowlatabad, a march measured in water, skins, oxen, and patience. Registers record allowances. Reality records blisters. Some offices move. Many households drift back. The court's handwriting appears in 2 cities at once, an empire trying to split its own center and keep both halves orderly. Way stations issue fodder by the monde. Toll gates count wheels. The road argues with the plan. Then the experiment with money. To stretch silver, the Sultan orders token currency, copper and brass tankas, to pass at the value of silver. The idea, ingenious in principle, relies on trust and policing in practice. Mints work, dies bite, edicts list penalties for counterfeiters. But households learn metal and fire, local smiths find the alloy, bazaars receive coins with official types and kitchen origins. Market men answer the chancery with scales. Prices slide, hordes of silver hide, soldiers are paid in theory and fed in resentment. Administration continues to file. The Diwan keeps military rolls. The Kananisha, royal regulations, attempt regular pay. The Barid reports which governors obey and which delay. In the Doab, revenue is set high to fund armies and roads. Drought and collection together become famine. Grain depots open late and thin. Villagers sell roofs for bread. Petitions travel slowly uphill. The Sultan rides fast, inspects canals and embankments, dictates improvements, then rides on. Improvement, like coin, needs patience more than proclamation. On the southern frontier, campaigns consume rope, nails, oxen, and days. In Gujarat and Deccan Post, treasurers juggle copper receipts against silver obligations. Traders prefer bullion to edicts. Caravans take longer routes to avoid officious zeal. When the token money fails, the order reverses itself. Bring copper to the treasury and receive silver. The honest rush. The clever rush faster. The treasury bleeds both coin and credibility. You study a shopkeeper's measures. A finger's width shaved from a seer. A thread more in the warp. And hear the quiet arithmetic of distrust. If governance asks markets to believe what metal denies, how many receipts can steady a price, and how long before people learn to mint their own answers? You travel with revenue officers through the Doab, where notebooks smell of rain and mildew. Assessments are recited in a calm cadence. So many gaz of sown land, so many man of grain owed, remissions granted only after petitions climb through hands inked with other priorities. The Sultan's ambition strains every column. He raises troops for projects that shimmer like mirages. Khurasan someday, a march into Karakil to discipline chiefs, a paved way toward China, and each intention writes a requisition before foundations are laid. In offices, the Diwan reconciles tallies. The Diwan checks rolls of cavalry whose horses are thinner than the pay sheets say. Paper believes what the field does not. Token coins arrive in sacks stamped with God's name and the sovereign. Bazaars answer with scales. A copper tanka buys less each week. The mint multiplies types to confuse counterfeiters. Kitchen hearths multiply them faster. Punishments are posted, and still brazier smoke obeys metal more than proclamations. You meet Ibn Battuta, a learned traveler turned Qadi, who notes Delhi's broad streets, heavy gates, and sudden orders. He writes of feasts lavish as sermons and punishments as routine. He also writes of famine, how officials opened stores late, how porters counted out loan grain to farmers who would repay in a future that never quite arrived. The Sultan's Diwan Kohai loans for seeds and wells look merciful in the order book and misjudged in the drought. Dowlatabad persists in the paperwork even as Delhi pulls the center back by habit. Couriers carry writs both ways. Way stations issue straw by the maund. Households choose the city whose markets they trust more. The Barid reports governors who hedge, saints who preach prudence, and money changers who will weigh copper but not believe it. Armies on the Deccan road eat the same bread as clerks in Delhi, and both count days to the next silver remittance. Rebellion is written as mileage and dates. In Sindh, in Bengal, and in the hills, men stop bowing to coins and start bowing to local grain. The court replies with detachments and edicts, then yields to arithmetic, the recall of token money. Bring copper, take silver. Honest men queue with jars of coins. Counterfeiters empty cupboards. The treasury pays back trust at a loss recorded with perfect handwriting. Soldiers demand arrears in the harder metal. The bazaar smiles without smiling. Receipts continue. Canal repairs, embankments, caravanserais, and bridges of boats. The Sultan rides to inspect and speaks carefully about order. Yet the language of markets stays skeptical. Money changers tilt test stones and watch the streak. Peasants look at clouds first, tax notices second. When revenues fall short, the crown raises rates. Collections decline further. Punishments fill the gap and still granaries echo. If price, punishment, and piety cannot fix the measure of value, what voice will people believe? The clink of silver, the weight of grain, or the hush that follows both? The end writes itself in reconciliations that never reconcile. You sit with a treasurer who stacks copper tankas into careful towers and notes, with professional calm, that the recall has drained silver while leaving mistrust intact. The order to redeem tokens is obeyed with zeal. Mints hammer through the night. Bullion leaves vaults like water finding a crack. Soldiers demand arrears in good metal. Caravan masters insist on specie. Shopkeepers weigh every coin as if each were an argument. Ledgers record revenues falling and obligations that do not fall. The arithmetic of a policy reversed too late. Governor's hedge. In Bengal, Ilyas Shah writes his own receipts. In the Deccan, Hassan Gangu lays foundations at Gulbarga. In Madurai, a new sultanate dates its papers to a calendar that no longer consults Delhi. The Barid carries reports with precise openings. Written on the 3rd of Sh, a letter to BFBA Macron N. And in precise endings, obedience is promised. Detachments are dispatched, allowances scheduled, routes assigned. Drought, distance, and thin confidence rub the ink away. The Diwanai Wizrat keeps balancing columns, but gaps widen like dry riverbeds. Punishments become repetitive and therefore dull. Fines, confiscations, removals, reinstatements. The Sultan rides fast, inspects embankments, orders canals, assigns seed loans, condemns the frauds that last month's rules made tempting. Improvements exist, buns hold here, relays work there. But confidence remembers longer than edicts. Money changers trust a silent test stone more than a proclamation. Peasants trust a low, steady cloud more than a promise. When men pay taxes in the thing they trust and officials pay troops in the thing they doubt, a realm learns two measures for the same weight. By the late 1340s, the map is already revised in practice. Revenues in the Doab arrive thin, horse prices fatten, auditors sharpen quills and lower expectations. The tokens are gone, but their ghost remains. A habit of testing, a taste for hoarding, a preference for short routes even when the toll is dearer because risk is smaller. In the south, the Bahmani state writes its first ordinances. In Bengal, ships and salt pans are listed as if they had always belonged there. Delhi stays large on paper and smaller at its edges. In 1351, the Sultan dies on campaign near Thatta, illness closing a ledger that never balanced. Firoz Shah will inherit the offices and attempt softer remedies, lower assessments, remissions, canals, changes that move slowly enough to keep pace with belief. Markets return to their ordinary talk of grain and shoes. Clerks file. The city breathes in a key 1 degree lower than ambition. You pass a stall where a money changer rubs a coin across his stone and watches the streak with the wary tenderness of a farmer watching the sky. If value lives where trust and metal meet, what does a reign teach a country when its bravest experiment was not roads or conquest, but the attempt to command belief, and the country answered with scales? Story 9. Leopold II and the Ledgers of a Colony. You wake to paper and palm in a counting room at Boma, where a clerk enters figures in a hand trained to look calm. The Congo Free State is a monarchy disguised as a company, and its king, Leopold II, governs by concession, contract, and chart. On one wall hangs a map webbed with rivers, on another, a schedule of steamers and posts, on the table, a ledger whose columns carry the weight of a forest. Rubber is recorded in kilos per post, per month, per man. Concession companies, ABIR and Anversois among them, hold vast tracts by charter. Their agents issue orders to posts that read like recipes. So many baskets of latex, so many hours allowed, so many rods of vine to cut. The latex must be smoked into dark balls before shipment. Balls must be tagged and listed. Lists must match the bales opened at Matadi. Where forests are abundant, quotas rise. Where they are thin, quotas do not fall. A shortage is written as a failure, not as a fact. The force publique appears in the books as rations and cartridges, uniforms and pay. Receipts for patrols name villages by distance from a river bend, not by consent. Accountants reconcile ammunition with proofs to prevent pilfering. A gruesome logic turns violence into paperwork. Hostages are kept to secure deliveries. Fines are assessed in labor, ivory, or goats. the quiet language of administration, collection, verification, compliance, expands to fill the space where ordinary households once measured days by fishing, gardens, and seasons. Steamers make rhythm. From the lower Congo to Stanley Falls, manifests list bolts of cloth, brass wire, salt, gin, rifles, and chained crates of rubber. The return loads carry officers, furniture, curios, and ivory bought at prices that look better in Antwerp than on the riverbank. Each bale receives a mark. Each mark, a place on a page. Each page, a column in Brussels where a royal foundations accounts present philanthropy and progress while dividends arrive discreetly. A private domain is laundered through public language. Distant objections harden into committees. Missionaries send letters that describe empty villages, flight into swamps, and gardens gone wild. A shipping clerk in Liverpool, E.D. Morel, studies manifests and notices that the exports are rubber and ivory, but the imports are guns and chains. The arithmetic offends before the prose does. In 1904, Roger Casement's report collects testimony into paragraphs. Those paragraphs acquire footnotes. The footnotes bend policy. The king replies with counter pamphlets and a new commission, and the forest answers with fewer vines. In the ledger before you, a clerk draws neat lines over a month that produced less than the last and writes, "Measures taken." You stare at the phrase as if it were a toll gate on a river. If a crown can turn distance into profit with schedules and stamps, how long can the paperwork keep its poise when the trees that feed the columns grow farther apart, and the stories tied to the figures begin to speak from the margins? You travel upriver with an inspector whose kit is a notebook, a scale, and a rubber-stained stamp. At each post the ritual repeats. Tally last month's kilos, compare to quota, weigh the smoky balls, cut a sliver to test dryness, issue brass rods or cloth coupons at the official rate. The storehouse ledger sorts the forest into columns, production, defects, fines. Behind the palisade, a hostage house keeps wives and children until the baskets return. When the vines sicken from overtapping, the quota remains. The margin for hunger absorbs what the account will not. The force publique appears again as arithmetic. Rations are written, cassava flour, salt, a dram of gin, alongside cartridges, boots, and the chicot strokes that a clerk reduces to numerals. Ammunition is reconciled against proofs, a word that files violence as inventory control. Patrols leave with a fixed allowance and return to audits where the anomalies are bodies, not numbers. Chiefs pressed into service collect from their own villages first, then from others. The book calls this facilitation, the people call it fear. Somewhere, a sergeant writes compliance good because the schedule was kept. In Antwerp, a different calm governs. The King's Foundation minutes note museum shipments for Tervuren, scholarships for tropical agriculture, and dividends discreetly unnamed. Brussels offices prepare pamphlets that emphasize treaties, roads, schools, and the new steamer placed on schedule. Receipts for missionary subsidies sit beside contracts for ivory lots. The same hand that signs for ethnographic displays signs for parts to a steam winch. Both will be reported as progress. Objections harden into institutions. E.D. Morel, reading manifests as if they were confessions, counts that guns and chain go in while rubber and ivory come out. He turns arithmetic into a movement, the Congo Reform Association. Roger Casement's 1904 report gathers testimonies with the dryness of civil service prose. Distances walked, days held, lashes counted, gardens abandoned. Photographs begin to circulate, but even without images the numbers disturb. Quotas cannot be reconciled with seasons, nor receipts with soil. Leopold replies with a commission of inquiry whose members visit river posts in 1904-05. The minutes are cautious. The findings, still in the vocabulary of administrators, confirm what villagers had been saying for years. Decrees follow, on labor terms, on hostages, on the limits of force. Concession companies adjust procedures without relaxing expectations. New forms replace old and ask for the same totals. The arithmetic has learned different words. On the ground, absence writes faster than policy. Villages move deeper into swamp and secondary forest. gardens shrink, sleeping sickness spreads along disrupted paths. Rubber yields drop where vines have been stripped, plantations are proposed, budgets drafted, and seasons refuse to obey paper. At a post farther upriver you read unproductive district, in a margin where the older ledger had named a clan. The steamer whistle sounds punctual, and the jungle answers with fewer voices. If a system can translate pain into schedules and reports, what finally breaks it? The numbers that no longer add, the stories that begin to travel with the mail boat, or the silence that spreads where the quotas once promised abundance. By 1908, the margins could no longer hide the sum. In Brussels, the debate turned from pamphlets to statutes. In the chamber, the annexation bill advanced with language promising humanitarian administration, schools, and roads. In the Congo, posts received new headed paper, Belgian Congo, and the same steamer schedules. Concession territories narrowed on maps, inspectors kept notebooks, the force publique kept its rations. The Matadi, Leopoldville Railway, completed 1898, moved cargo that once bent backs along the cataracts. A governor-general issued circulars on labor contracts, coined taxes, and limits on hostages. On the ground, habits changed by inches. Audits traveled outward and inward. Brussels demanded annual reports listing schools opened, cases tried, kilometers of road repaired. District officers compiled tables with confidence learned in Europe and truth learned on muddy paths. Some children sat in new classrooms. Some clinics opened. In many places, the arithmetic of compulsion persisted under tidier headings. Where vines were exhausted, plantations were planned, seedlings charted by nursery, budgets anticipated yields that rain and wages diluted. Rubber exports fell. Palm kernels and copper rose. The ledgers adjusted their columns and kept moving. Commerce redistributed itself. Antwerp's auction still received bales stamped with posts upriver. Now they also received copper ingots, cut timber, and sacks of kernels. Company names shifted. Dividends stayed. Missionaries kept diaries that mixed vocabulary lessons, births, burials, and the price of soap with notes that a patrol had pressed men for road work when tax fell due. Some abuses receded, others turned sideways, recorded as insufficient labor response. The phrase looked peaceful on paper and hounded households just the same. Head taxes in coin pushed men into wage labor at posts that paid late and fined early. The humanitarian campaign had changed the grammar. Morel's association became a file. Casement's report joined the shelf of blue books. Yet their arithmetic endured. Costs compared with cargo, promises compared with miles. Parliamentary questions required answers. Answers required categories. Categories fostered counting that sometimes pinched practice toward decency simply by being looked at. Where numbers could not explain scars, photographs and sworn statements leaked through and did slow work. You ride a steamer that now whistles at times fixed by a printed timetable. Children carry rubber seedlings in baskets. Men unload salt and cloth. A clerk checks names against a tax roll. Downriver, a judge travels with a code translated into plain French. Upriver, an officer still bargains with a chief by wire and gun. The colony speaks like Europe while living by a river's older logic. Move when water is high, pause at shoals, improvise when the manifest lies. It is steadier, not gentle. In 1914, another ledger opens, titled War. Copper for shells, men for carriers. Schedules written elsewhere fall on villages that never saw the maps. After the war, reform will be promised again. You close a file at Boma and listen to leaves move, wondering. When profit, pity, and policy have all taken their turns in the margins, what finally remains legible in the forest's own accounting. Story 10. Richard II and the Receipts of a Failing Kingship. You wake to the creak of tallies at Westminster, where the exchequer still chants like a monastery of numbers. Richard II wears the crown, but much of his rule flows through receipts. Wool customs from the merchants of the staple at Calais, tonnage and poundage on wine and goods, fines noted in chancery hands. Sheriffs present accounts on wooden counters. Clerks notch hazel sticks and split them so debtor and king keep matching bones of memory. Revenue arrives only when winds, wars, and wool cooperate. His household is a government within the government. The great wardrobe issues cloth by the ell, the pantry and buttery log bread, ale, and wax. The chamber pays favored servants directly from cash boxes that travel with the king. Privy seal and signet letters, faster than the formal chancery, let orders leap the usual fences. Credit eases gaps. Italian bankers advance, staple merchants prepay, and purveyors seize carts and oats at the king's price. Promises are filed as carefully as payments. The 1370s and 1380s teach rough lessons. To fund the war, Parliament approves poll taxes in 1377, 1379, and 1380, flat charges that ignore harvests. Collection lists march into villages. In 1380, one rebellion answers with burned records and shouted meetings. In London, the teenage king rides out, promises charters of freedom, and after order returns, revokes them in minutes written as neatly as the grants. The apparatus survives. Commissions of oyer and terminer sift cases, fines and pardons refill boxes. After 1386, the Lords Appellant press the crown, auditing favorites as if they were accounts in arrears. The merciless Parliament of 1388 writes condemnations in language like bookkeeping, offices misused, sums misappropriated, penalties assigned. Richard learns a different arithmetic, patience, and memory. In the 1390s, he rebuilds a following with annuities, robes, and offices. Cheshire archers guard his person. Recognizances bind lords to keep the peace and stay near. A royal council sits continually, but the king's chamber grows stronger, paying where Parliament hesitates. Peace with France in 1396 buys time, though pensions and marriages cost in other columns. Reforming ordinances trim household waste on paper, fewer courses, stricter liveries, yet spectacle persists, cloth and progress through shires that behave like audits of obedience. Sheriffs receive lists of justices to trust and men to watch. Loans are solicited as benevolences not quite voluntary. Blank charters, sealed parchments left to be filled, appear in counties that understand ink and pressure. In 1397, the reckoning on the appellants proceeds like a tallied debt. Tresillian's old judgments are praised, rivals condemned, forfeitures swell the chamber's income. In 1398, a quarrel between Henry Bolingbroke and Norfolk is settled by exile. Soon afterward, Lancaster's vast estates, fallen by death to the absent Henry, are taken into the king's hands. The entry is practical, custody for the crown, until it reads like appetite. If a ruler learns to govern through household cash boxes, recognizances, and blank parchments as much as through Parliament and Exchequer, how secure are the sums when the men who sign them choose a different counter? Summer of 1399 opens with tidy columns. Richard crosses to Ireland intending to audit obedience in person. Warrants authorize oats for horses, wages for Cheshire archers, and gifts for chiefs whose names are counted like cattle. In England, custody of Lancaster's estates continues during pleasure, a phrase that feels harmless in ink and sharp in memory. The chamber receives rents that once fed another household. Receivers remit. Local officers note the change and keep their counsel. Henry of Bolingbroke lands at Ravensbourne with a smaller force and a larger claim. Not the crown, he says, but his inheritance, a wording shaped like an invoice. Commissions of array assemble shire levies. Some come slow, others not at all. Receivers for duchy manors open doors to their rightful lord. Towns weigh risk in barrels of salt fish and loans. The council in London writes orders. County officers wait to see which seal will arrive at their gates. Richard's return is measured in boats, tides, and rumors. The itinerary, once printed on warrants, phrase into hearsay. He is at Milford Haven, then Carmarthen, then nowhere trustworthy. When the royal army thins, pay lists remain thick. Recognizances still bind men to appear and behave. The chamber still issues fees, but obedience counts the odds. At Conway and then Flint, negotiation becomes a ledger of promises. Safe conduct, respectful custody, answers deferred to Westminster. The king rides under guard. Chests travel too, rattling like abacuses in the slow procession. Numbers ride beside. In London, guilds set tables and measure loyalty in tapestries and cups. Henry moves through Cheapside as if through accounts payable. The tower yields. The signet changes hands. The archives receive orders to prepare articles. Parliament is summoned. Clerks draft a case that sounds like an audit. Waste of treasure, perversion of justice, illegal exactions, unlawful seizures, the pillaging of Lancaster, the setting aside of counsel. Each charge reads like a misposted entry corrected in the margin. At Westminster in September, Richard is invited to resign and presented as having done so. The ceremony is long in paper and short in voice. The deposition articles are read. The roll records attendance. Officers take new oaths. Writs go out in Henry's name with a hand that writes smoothly. The exchequer continues to sit. Wool customs continue to be farmed. The staple at Calais continues to reckon. What changes is custody of the cash boxes and the confidence that follows them. Meanwhile, in the shires, recognizances are recalculated, pardons reissued, and claims repointed at the new center. Men who borrowed trouble with blank charters bring them in for favorable interpretation. Others who carried the chamber's favor as a shield swap badges. Judges, once cowed, rediscover precedent. Receivers who filled the chamber's purse from forfeitures learn to balance different columns while watching new commissioners. If the kingdom has changed signatures more easily than habits, what precisely has been settled? The wrong numbers or the method of counting? After the roll of deposition is stored, routine carries the kingdom like a barge on slow water. You walk the exchequer hall and hear the same chants. Wool customs at Calais, tonnage on wine, poundage on cloth. Only the names on the warrants have changed. Richard is sent north to Pontefract with a close list of servants. Their allowances are itemized: bread, ale, candles, like any household lodged in custody. In London, clerks draft forms for oaths to Henry, by grace of God, and sheriffs copy them in a hand that remembers other styles. The fate of a captive is entered sparsely. In February 1400, death is recorded with a clerk's economy: day, place, witnesses, distribution of wax for the funeral convoy. The body is brought south and shown to still rumor. Expenses are noted: black cloth for hangings, alms by the penny, fees for toll exemptions on the road. Receipts do their old work of calming voices. In the margin of one account, a tidy note for the carriage of a chest of tallies. Even grief travels with paperwork. Henry's first months are arithmetic under pressure. He must pay the men who opened gates, restore inheritances that Richard had tasted, and persuade Parliament to grant subsidies that arrive before arrears devour them. Annuities are confirmed or commuted. Recognizances are cancelled, renewed, or replaced with softer bonds. Ordinances trim the wardrobe on paper. Sheriffs receive instructions to answer writs without waiting on hints from the chamber. The budget learns a new path, more through grants in Parliament, less through private boxes. Then the revolt in Wales begins to scratch at columns. Owen Glyndwr's name appears in commissions, in payments for archers and cartage, in memos about castles that need lime and carpenters. Supplies are listed by the hundred: arrows, shoes, peas, and forwarded with the promise that arrears will be made good after the wool fleet clears. The coinage is steady in name and variable in trust. Merchants still test silver on stones. Receivers still prefer hard money to warrants, even when the warrants are courteous. You sit with a judge copying pardons that sweep broadly and exclusions that do not. The realm adapts to a king who rules by meetings of estates more than by recognizances. It also adapts to the familiar fact that garrisons eat, horses founder, and roads dissolve at the wrong hour. The staple of Calais remains a pivot. Loans from merchants come with conditions. Sheriffs still sell the year's farm with hopeful calculations. What changes is the temper at the center, and the length of the leash between signature and shire. In a quiet gallery at Westminster you read old blank charters, now cancelled, the seals pried off and bagged. The parchment curls as if relieved. A porter sweeps sand from a clerk's table. If a kingship can be undone by the way it keeps its books, too private, too punitive, too deft, what exactly is the true treasure of a realm? its coffers, or the unworried habit of its counters. Night pools along the old stones. A moth circles the lamp, tasting glue in the bindings, finding the threads that hold the ledgers to their boards. Somewhere, a soft brush of wings, and the numbers dream of being leaves again.